Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Let me today present you the preliminary research of my PhD, the workshops, the technical evolution and the production of glass, Vandormael and Victor Horta, and finally a bit on the integration of game glass in the architecture. So my PhD topic is profane Brussels game glasswork during the Belle époque. Profane, so no public buildings, only private residences. Brussels is mainly the first crown, the première couronne, so the municipalities directly next to the city center. Game, I prefer to use this term instead of stained glass because all stained glass is game glass, but not all game glass is stained glass. So this refers to the fact that stained glass is always painted, while game glass refers to the game, which could be lead, but also copper, as you can see here in the example of the Vuist, mise en plomb et mise en cuivre, so they apply both metals. And the Belle époque, which I've defined 1880 to 1914. The key research question is there an integration between game glass and the architecture? And what exactly is the relation between the building owner, the architect, and the game glass workshop? The workshops, so the first thing I did was the research on the almanac. They are a bit the page d'or, the telephone books avant la lettre. And I've looked at two entries, peintre sur verre, and the other one, verre à vitre, vitraux d'art et vitraux peints. And this was the result. First of all, what is remarkable here is that there is a very high amount of workshops visible. So we have 342 unique workshops over the entire period, with a peak here in 1911 of 98 workshops. If we split these numbers up between the peintre and the vitraux, so peintre means the workshops which promote themselves as we paint on glass, and the vitraux, rather the ones who say we just set the glass in game in lead. Then we see that the peintre show an overall decline, and that the ones which are growing are the ones who just set the glass in lead. These are some of the names which pop up, and the ones in green I will elaborate upon. Some of these names are still known. You have the famous ones, Capronnier, Vandormael, Crix, and Colpaert in the Art Deco period. Some of these names were once lost, were once known, but are unfortunately forgotten. Hector Thijs is a good example. Here on the right you see the front page of Sander Pierron's livre, where Hector Thijs is between Rodin, Chamberlain, Horta, Laarmans, Lambeau, and Philippe Wolfers. So really the canon of 19th century art. Unfortunately, not much is known about him. And so most names are unknown. Company archives are lost. That's something we've heard a couple of times today. The lack of signatures. Some authors explain this because it is a team effort. So instead of one single person creating a window, there are a lot of people doing it together, so it's not clear who should sign finally. And from a stylistic point of view, it's not easy to attribute a window to a specific workshop, since it is really à la tête du client. So it was the client making the requests. Sometimes, which is quite rare, I find signatures such as this one of workshop Vosch in the Rue du Noyer in Schaerbeek. This is also the workshop which is the oldest one still in existence in Brussels. So it's the 4th generation, still going strong today. And the question is, if you see this decline of the peintre sur verre, contemporary sources like Léon Dumont-Tournelle, when he reviews the Paris exposition in 1900, he says, l'art du peintre verrier est absolument transformé. Il ne demande pas de sérieuses qualités artistiques, il n'exige que un approvisionnement de verre considérable. And why is this? Because of this technical evolution, le verre américain, American glass, it's named like this because it was invented almost simultaneously by John Lafarge and Louis Comfort Tiffany in the 1880s, sometimes also referred to as Tiffany glass. It's opalescent, so it means it's translucent but not transparent, so the light goes through but you can't see through it. And it has often this milky color of 2 colors or more. A famous example is the Toulouse-Lautrec Louis Comfort Tiffany. So Toulouse-Lautrec and Lenabi, they designed the cartoons which were sent to the US and executed by Tiffany. This example is in Musée d'Orsay. So it was invented in the early 1880s. Already in France, very early on, Eugène Oudinot started using American glass. So the small yellow parts of the columns here you see in the middle, this is American glass. But for the large public, it was only at the Expo of Paris that they got acquainted with the new technique. Back to Belgium then, as of 1895 in the region of Charleroi, the production of American glass started here. Charleroi, which was a very productive center of glass, over 10,000 people were working in different factories. The recipe book I found in the Musée du Verre in Charleroi is a great example of how experimental this was. So you here have the example of the Chez Georges. So here is really one of the workers who composes a recipe and writes the Chez Georges, and he and afterwards it's changed by another person who writes essayer 60 kilos de calcaire. Technology transfer, this is important. Bernard Tirtio wrote a novel about this. It's not an academic work, but rather a book, a fictional book. But there is partially a truth in there. So in the old stained glass community in Belgium, they tell me that there is this urban legend that in France and in Belgium in the 1870s, early 1880s, this technology was known and it was sold to Tiffany instead of inventing it in the US. American glass, often in Brussels, you can see it in the texture chimier, often very subtly applied, with the exception of Horta, who often uses this in very large surfaces. Then Horta. So 1893 in Maison Autrique is what I believe is the first use of American glass in Brussels. So here the fruit of this tree is, I believe, the first use. In Hotel Tassel, the note I should tell here, this is not my findings, this is Benjamin Zugstrasse who wrote this in an article on Hotel Tassel. This is highly influenced by Japanese prints. This is Hiroshige's print from the 1830s. So the earliest Art Nouveau windows in Brussels are all influenced by Japanese art. The fumoir here on the right, this is a restitution, so I'm not confident on the techniques used here. It was the workshop Overloop, which is a workshop which Horta applied for the Hotel Tassel. And Overloop very early on saw the potential of Horta, and he writes, hey, Monsieur Horta, we want to work with you as much as possible pour 350 francs parce que nous sommes désirants de travailler le plus que possible avec vous. And it is this workshop at the same address that Raphaël Evaldre would take over and would turn it into the biggest workshop in Brussels. Evaldre and Horta, they work very intensively together. So for almost all of the major townhouses of Horta, so Horta makes the design and then has Evaldre executed. And there's a clear evolution away from these early Japanese-inspired windows to Horta's own designs. And what is remarkable in the end here, I've listed them in red, is that there is a gap between the last two. So after a while, they stopped collaborating. My hypothesis is that a bit comparable to the story of Horta and Paul Visavone, the architect, the student, which he had a fight with, that it's possible that Evaldre, who executed the windows in Hotel Hanon, also had a fight with Horta at the same moment, so 1903, around this period. And this may be the reason why they broke up and they stopped working together for a couple of years. Other works of Evaldre, it's not only with Horta that he works, but also with Paul Saint-Gilles, for example, and Privat-Livement, who makes the cartoon of the windows in the Rue Arbrebenie, so the private house of Paul Saint-Gilles. And on the right, it's the residence of the governor in Limburg. After the war, his workshop is sacked by the Germans during the war, and he quits stained glass. Then the integration in architecture. So the question is, who is responsible for what? And a great archival resource is the Bardenhewer model book. So this is one of the workshops in Brussels, Bardenhewer. In the Corning Museum of Glass in the US, they have this book in which he comments on his own works. So there are pictures, photographs in this book, and the artist himself writes things beneath them. For example, here, style moderne exigé par les clients. So it's really in this case, the customer who requests this style. Also in the contemporary sources, Revue des Arts Décoratifs, you can read, le vitrail, la place qu'elle s'occupe dans l'œuvre d'architecture s'impose à toutes les industries d'art. Le vitrail est le serviteur obéissant de l'architecture. In l'art moderne, la décoration n'est que le développement de la pensée créatrice de l'architecte. Il ne peut être disjoint du gros œuvre. Le vitrail, blablabla, la conception d'ensemble pour en assurer l'unité. Donc, here the contemporary sources really have the idea of integration between the glass and the architecture. But is this really the case in Brussels? And for the pioneers, Hankar, he does not use that often, game glass. But for Horta, it's quite clear. There are very strong directives of Horta to Evaldre. For example, this letter from the Hortamuseum. Horta says, pas encore approuvé car nous devons changer les verres. Donc, Horta really, until the detail of the colors of the glass, was making his remarks to Evaldre. Another one, Richard Pringiers, somebody working at the Horta atelier, writes to Evaldre, les subdivisions du Verlambri de la serre van Eetvelde sont bonnes. So this is clear, very detailed directions from the architect to the glass workshop. And for Horta, the Gesamtkunstwerk, whether it was the designing of the rug for Anna Boch or the windows, the creation, the artistic process was more or less the same. So he designed it and then passed it through the specialists to execute it. Then for the younger generation, I've taken as an example Jules Brunfaux. So Jules Brunfaux, 1899 in Saint-Gilles, he builds this building, a neo-Venetian facade with a Renaissance revival game glass. So here there is a clear relation between the game glass and the building it is in. At the same year, Brunfaux, a hyper-eclectic facade with an Art Nouveau window. And 1 year later, so in 1900, again an Italian-influenced facade, Sienese Gothic influences, but with a window in the end post of the door, which is not aligned. His most famous work, of course, is Hotel Hanon, where Evaldre executes the windows. And here we see that there is actually a very high alignment between the use of the room, the winter garden, and the iconography of the window. Also an alignment with the architecture, so the steel ribs of the window frame, they align with the cane glass pattern of the vegetation, so this means this is tailor-made for this location. It is, however, unclear or less clear to what extent Brunfaux really gave these directions and to what extent Evaldre just had to execute them. Then even a bit younger, so perhaps the second or third generation of Art Nouveau architects, here we see that it is really the choice of the customer. For example, these birds show that across different areas in Brussels, you can find them. And so for me, this means that it was really based on a sales catalog where the customer could choose, hey, I want this bird for my house. These were the types of sales catalogs where they could choose from whether you want a Renaissance or an Empire or Louis XV style. Sometimes it was also anonymous. The same catalog of Georges Broekaert, so one of the workshops in the list, I also found anonymous as GB because the architect would not disclose the name of the workshop in order to avoid that the customer would go directly to the workshop. And then, for example, Ernesto Bauer, these are one-on-one finds I've seen to link the stained glass in situ, which is at Kuckelberg, with the sales catalog of Bauer. And then finally, the help. If you see interesting game glass windows in Brussels or archival documents, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Just send me a message or a mail, and I will be very happy to add them to my research. Thank you very much.